Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Parvez's Trade. My name is Parvez Khan, and I will be talking to you about global politics, global economics, and how you can make money from it. And so, the last few episodes, we talked about the energy market, the North American energy market, the Europe energy market, and also what's going on in the Middle East, how the oil and gas markets might pan out in the Middle East in the future, near-term future. And we connected a few dots. We talked about all the Western companies that are located in Middle East, whether they'll stay or leave or adjust to the new reality in the Middle East. And yeah, so I just wanted to add a caveat to what I said in the last video where I talked about, the Western companies now being, so the Western companies came to the Middle East because they wanted to avoid paying too much taxes in the West. And now the Western government are basically kind of forcing them to pay more taxes or relocate back to the West. And they have to choose between that and staying in the Middle East and still paying more taxes. And on top of that, these Western companies in the Middle East are now incentivized to hire local Middle Eastern people, Arabic people, who are educated and skilled. But obviously, they'll come with their own culture to the workplace, which is different, not bad, different. And so the Western companies will have to decide paying more taxes to the Western governments and staying in the Middle East and hiring these locals, which might end up in a net benefit if the other Western foreign expats already working in these Western companies in the Middle East can adjust to the real life, to the new life, to the new culture, or would it be beneficial for them to pack up their things and move back to the Western countries? They might get tax incentives. So I'm no way predicting that there will be a big drain of Middle Eastern companies from the Middle East. That's not what I'm trying to predict. What my prediction is, for example, when Trump first came into power in his first term, he dropped the corporate tax rate from, I think, 35% to 21%. And that basically forced a lot of US companies to bring their headquarters back to US. Not forced, but incentivized. And so that brought about, I think, two or $300 billion of the revenue back to the US. And see UK, Keir Starmer trying to do the same, not by lowering the corporate tax, but by creating laws that basically increases the taxes on non-dom UK citizens. And so these dynamics are interplaying with the recent efforts by the right efforts by the Middle Eastern leaders to promote their youth into the workplace, which is the right effort. And so, how will that end? And yeah, I believe there will be a temporary drain of foreign companies in the Middle East, but that's not a bad thing because that might be replaced by local Middle Eastern companies. And so that might promote businesses in the Middle East, really, if you think about it, local businesses. And the temporary drain might bring about what we say a temporary drop in energy usage in the Middle East, right? But it might be very temporary. But I guess the prediction I made in the last video where I talked about Middle Eastern countries, their own energy consumption and how that will change in the future. I think in the long run, obviously the energy consumption will increase. But in the short run, while these countries are going through this transition phase of integrating their local citizens into the workplace, and some of these, or maybe most of these Western countries, kind of incentivized, kind of forced to move their businesses back to the West, and then before they're replaced by local Middle Eastern companies, there will be a phase where there will be sudden a bit of drop in energy demand as comes with because energy demand is directly correlated with economic activity. And so I think that's why I was talking about, oh, sorry. And in this video, I wanted to delve into that part, which is energy demand intensifies in places where there is economic activity growth. So, people are focused on selling energy to Asia, oil and gas, and, energy demand in Asia will, surpass any other places in the next few decades because they will have the highest growth rate. Africa as well. So if you look at the charts, the fastest growing countries in terms of GDP growth rate, the fastest growing countries, the top 30, top 50 are all in Asia and Africa. That's where you'll see the most demand growth in economic activity and the most demand growth in energy usage. And so obviously, these Middle Eastern countries with who have this dominant role to play in the energy markets, they will have to their cater their services to the needs of Asia and Africa, right? For the last few decades, they catered their needs to the West, to Europe and USA and North Canada, because those were where the economic activity grew the fastest. But now that growth is shifting, the economic growth is shifting to Africa and Asia. So now the Middle East will have to cater their political stance, their services to this growing economic activity in Africa and Asia. And you'll see that reflected in Middle Eastern countries now being more inclined to take military support from Eastern countries and the global South, and taking more technology adoptions from the global South and East. And I think that so the main topic I wanted to talk about in this video is related to economic growth. Okay, we want to keep energy in the back. We'll talk about energy again in future videos, but in this video, I wanted to talk a bit more in detail about economic growth. How do you grow your GDP? How do you grow your economy? And so in my previous videos, if you haven't watched them, I talked about economy can be grown in two major ways. Okay. One is the organic way, where your country as a whole is producing more goods, and then it's producing more goods. So GDP is basically gross domestic product. And so the if you're producing more goods, the economy grows, right? That's just obvious. And that's one way to grow your economy and to get wealthy. And the other way is basically if you have a reserve currency or an internationally recognized currency, you can basically grow your economy by what we call monetizing it. So let's just put it simply. Let's say you're country A, okay, and your GDP is $100. Okay, you produce $100 worth of goods. Okay? And now next year you are more productive or you have more people, and so as a whole you're producing, let's say, $110 worth of goods. Everything else being equal, your GDP grew just by producing more growth, more products, right? And then let's look at another scenario. Your country B, and you have $100 GDP, and you have a reserve currency. And so, what's the difference between a normal currency and a reserve currency? You can basically, to put it in layman terms, you can export your inflation, and I'll explain that in a bit. So, your country B, you're producing $100 worth of goods, okay? So there's $100 of money in circulation. There should be at least, right? If your total gross domestic product is $100, that means there's $100 chasing all the products. Makes sense, right? And so in countries A scenario, country A, the previous one, you're producing $10. You went from $100 worth of goods to now you're producing $110 worth of goods. So you're producing $10 extra worth of goods that you're selling to another country, and in return, that currency is giving you $10. So now you have $110 in circulation. That's why you have $110 worth of GDP, $110 worth of goods produced, and you have this additional $10 in circulation money. In countries B's case, now they're producing $100 worth of goods. Okay, cool. Now, because they're not increasing the production of goods because they have a bad manufacturing base, the employees are not being more productive, or the population is not increasing, or it could be a combination of these factors. And so you can't produce more worth of goods to sell to other countries and increase your GDP. So what do you do? In country B, you have $100 worth of goods. You have a reserve currency. You cannot increase the production of goods. So what do you do to increase your GDP? At least on paper, you print additional $10, and now you have $110 in circulation, and your GDP is $110. But the amount of goods you produced is $100. So where does the $10 go into? It goes into bidding up the existing goods at a high price. And so what does this mean? It means inflation. And what does it mean regarding exporting inflation? Your country B, okay, for whatever reason, you are failing to produce any additional new goods, products. You have $100 worth of products. You want to increase your GDP on paper, so people think you're improving the economy as a politician, as a leader, blah, blah, blah. What do? You issue $10 new loans, new credit, because every fiat currency is credit. So now you have $110 in circulation. On paper, your GDP grew by 10%. Cool. But what's actually happening on the ground? Now you have $110 bidding up $100 worth of products, right? That's what would happen if your country B was not importing any products. But that's not the world we live in. Every country can import products, bring in products. So that's what I mean by printing new money, increasing the GDP on paper, exporting inflation, because now there's $10 extra in global circulation, which will beat up the prices of existing goods. And so this inflation is now exported to other countries. And I know it sounds very complicated, so let's just look at it from a simple sense. Sorry. You have country A, okay? They have $100 worth of goods. You have country B, they have $100 worth of goods produced. Country B has a reserve currency, so they have decided to print $10 new money, issue $10 new credit. So now there's $10 more in circulation, but the production has remained at $100. They've still produced $100 worth of goods. There's just additional $10 new in the circulation. That $10 goes into bidding up the products of country A and increasing the prices, and that products get imported into country B. So prices speed up, imported. The consumers in country B are paying high prices. Less products in country A because a bit of product was imported with this new money. Less products in country A means inflation. So you have inflation in country A because a bit of product has been imported with this newly issued money by country B, which has reserve currency. More inflation in country B because it's more money chasing the same amount of domestic goods. and chasing more expensive imported goods. So inflation in country B, inflation in country A. What's the cause? The cause is the issuance of this $10 new credit of reserve money. And why does reserve money be able to do it? If your currency of country B was not a reserve currency, this $10 newly issued will not cannot be used to import the good. We can only import goods using reserve currency. That's the fundamental reason why having a reserve currency and printing a shitload of money to improve your GDP on paper makes inflation go up for your own country, for other countries. And that's what basically happened during COVID with the Western countries and mainly with US dollar, right? And so that's been the fundamental issue with the Western countries. People say, I saw this recent video, oh, the UK economy is broken, US economy, it looks good on paper, but people can't find a job. People can't, even if they have two jobs, they can't buy eggs, blah, blah, blah. And the reason is that. The reason is because your country is not growing its GDP in an organic manner. It's just abusing its reserve currency status to export inflation around the world, beat up the prices, and improving their GDP only on paper to get reelected. That's been the fundamental issue. Okay. And if you can't, and so then people complain, especially you have noticed that Western countries recently complain, oh, China has an excess capacity. This is a new word they have, which is excess capacity, which basically means they can produce more goods than we can at a competitive price, right? And they're talking about excess capacity of China in the EV market, in the manufacturing market, as if it's a bad thing. China is exporting deflation. When China is exporting products because they have an excess capacity, they're exporting these products at a competitive price. They're exporting deflation. They're suppressing inflation, not just in China, but around the world. These Western countries are talking about how China is the bad guy. They have excess capacity. And any economist will tell you having excess capacity actually brings down inflation around the world. It doesn't increase. And so I think that's something fundamental that people need to understand. So, like, what's the future? Is this sustainable? I mean, if you have any brain cells, I mean, you can tell that it's not, right? You cannot just continually abuse your reserve currency status, drive up inflation around the world, and people will just take it up. Because, I mean, yeah, people turned the other cheek the last few decades because America's superpower status was more or less unquestioned. But now that Russia is challenging it, China is challenging it, the BRICS currencies are challenging it, the BRICS countries. That's no longer the case. And so this is where the BRICS comes in and changes the game completely.